The key was cold and heavy in my hand, a solid piece of brass that felt like it held more than just the mechanism of a lock. It felt like a lifetime. I stood on the freshly painted porch, the scent of cut grass and recent rain hanging in the air, and I looked at the house. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't even the biggest house on the block, but it was perfect. A sturdy, two-story colonial with a deep blue door and a maple tree in the front yard that would turn a brilliant fire engine red in the fall. I'd already pictured my daughter, Chloe, sitting on that porch swing I planned to install, a book in her hand, a cup of tea steaming beside her. This was the promise, the one I made to her when she was 7 years old after her mother passed. We were sitting on the floor of our old apartment, surrounded by a fortress of cardboard boxes. Her small face was puffy from crying, her little hand clutching my shirt. "I don't want to leave, Daddy," she'd whispered. "This is Mommy's house." I held her tight, my own heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. "I know, baby," I'd said, my voice thick, "but we have to be brave. And I promise you, one day, I will buy you a house of your own. A real home. A safe one. Just for you." That promise became my compass. Every overtime shift I picked up, every promotion I fought for, every dollar I scrimped and saved was funneled toward that single, shining goal. It wasn't just a house. It was a monument to stability, a fortress against the unpredictability of the world that had already taken so much from her. Through her teenage years, through college, that promise was the North Star of our relationship. When things got tough, I'd say, "Remember the house, Chloe. We're going to get there." And we did. She met Mark when she was in her final year of university. I'll admit I was wary. He was charming, sure, with a quick smile and an easy laugh, but there was something in his eyes that never quite settled. A restlessness. He came from a different world than us, a family that seemed to lurch from one financial crisis to another, always looking for the next easy score. But Chloe loved him. She saw a project, a man she could save with her own steady love. She had her mother's heart, too big for its own good. I held my tongue. I gave my blessing. When he proposed, I smiled and hugged them both, pushing my doubts down into a deep, dark place. My promise was to her, and if he was part of her happiness, then so be it. I closed on the house a month before the wedding. It was the biggest, most terrifying, and most exhilarating check I had ever written. I didn't tell her. I waited until the day after they returned from their honeymoon. I drove them to the street, their eyes blindfolded in the back of my car, their laughter filling the space. "Dad, this is ridiculous." Chloe giggled. "Just a little farther," I said, my heart pounding with a joy I hadn't felt in years. I stopped the car, helped them out, and led them up the walkway. I took the key from my pocket and placed it in her hand before I removed the blindfold. Her reaction was everything I had dreamed of for 15 years. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide, filling with instant tears. "Daddy," she breathed, her voice trembling. She looked from the key in her hand to the house, to me, and back again. "Is this?" "It's yours," I said, my own vision blurring. "Welcome home, baby." The hug she gave me contained the weight of every struggle, every lonely night, every sacrifice. It was all worth it in that moment. Mark was slapping me on the back, his enthusiasm booming. "This is incredible, John. Unbelievable. Thank you." I handed him the key. "This is for both of you," I said, looking him squarely in the eye. "But it's for her. You understand? This is her safe place." "Of course," he said, his grin wide, his grip firm. "Absolutely. I'll take care of her, John. I promise." I watched them walk up to the blue door, Chloe's arm linked with his, her head on his shoulder. She turned and waved at me, her face radiant with a joy so pure it almost hurt to look at. I waved back, my heart so full I thought it might burst. As I drove away, the last of the evening sun glinting off my rearview mirror, I felt a profound sense of completion. The promise was kept. My daughter was safe, loved, and home. The story, I thought, was over. I had no idea it was only just beginning. The first few months were a picture-perfect dream, the kind you see in brochures for suburban living. Chloe's enthusiasm was a constant, bright flame. Every weekend, I'd get a call. "Dad, you have to come see the curtains I found," or "Mark's building a raised garden bed out back. Bring your drill." I'd show up with a toolbox and a smile, and we'd spend the day painting a room or assembling furniture. The house was slowly transforming, filling up with their life. Photos of their honeymoon on the mantelpiece, a garish but endearing abstract painting Mark's younger brother had made for them. The faint smell of Chloe's lavender candles. It felt like a home. It felt like my promise was breathing and thriving. Mark was the perfect host during these visits. He'd clap me on the shoulder, offer me a beer, and talk animatedly about his plans. He got a new job in sales, and he was full of talk about commissions and quotas, his confidence spilling over. I started to feel a creeping sense of shame for my initial doubts. The man loved my daughter. He was trying. Who was I to judge his ambition? The first thread, small and almost invisible, began to unravel about 6 months in. It was a Sunday evening. I just helped them hang a heavy mirror in the living room. We were having a pizza on the porch when Mark's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face tightening almost imperceptibly. He excused himself and went inside, his voice a low, tense murmur from the kitchen. Chloe's smile became a little strained. "Everything okay?" I asked gently. "Oh, it's just his mom," she said, waving a hand dismissively, but her eyes followed him inside. "You know how it is. I did and I didn't." I knew his family was a source of stress, a constant, low-grade drama that seemed to follow him. His father had passed years ago, and his mother, Brenda, held on to her 2 other sons, Ray and Donnie, with a possessive, needy grip. They were both in their late 20s, perpetually between jobs and girlfriends, living with Brenda in a cramped apartment across town. Mark was this successful one, the golden child who had escaped, and that success came with expectations. The first real intrusion happened on a Tuesday. I'd stopped by after work to drop off a spare lawnmower I had. Mark's car was in the driveway, which was unusual for that time of day. When Chloe opened the door, her smile was tight, not reaching her eyes. "Hey, Dad, come on in." The living room, usually so pristine, was cluttered. A duffel bag was slumped by the stairs. And on my sofa, the one I'd helped them carry in, sat Ray, Mark's younger brother. He was playing a loud video game on the big screen TV, a beer in his hand, his feet in worn-out socks propped on the coffee table. "Hey, Mr. J," he said without looking away from the screen. Mark emerged from the kitchen, looking harried. "John." "Hey." His apartment building had a pipe burst. He's gonna crash on our couch for a few days, just until it gets sorted." My eyes met Chloe's. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a silent plea not to make a scene. The welcome on the mat of the front door suddenly felt less like an invitation and more like a surrender. "A few days," I said, my voice flat. "A week tops," Mark assured me, his salesman's smile firmly in place. "It's no big deal." But it was a big deal. A week turned into 2. I'd come over and Ray would still be there, a permanent fixture on the couch, the fridge growing emptier, the dynamic of the house shifting. Chloe started looking tired. The lavender candle smell was being overpowered by the scent of microwaved frozen dinners and stale beer. When Ray finally left, there was a palpable sense of relief. But the precedent had been set. The fortress had been breached. The welcome mat, I realized with a sinking feeling, wasn't just for Chloe and Mark anymore. It was for anyone Mark's family decided to send our way. The dream was still there, but a shadow had fallen across it, small and patient, waiting to grow. The departure of Ray felt less like a victory and more like the calm before storm. The house seemed to exhale, the clutter vanished, and for a few precious weeks, the old rhythm returned. Chloe's smile was easier. The lavender scent fought its way back from the brink, and the only feet on the coffee table were Mark's, which, while I disapproved, at least belonged there. But the precedent had been set. The lock had been picked, not with a tool, but with a sense of familial obligation and emotional blackmail. The next intrusion wasn't a slow leak, it was a flood. It was a Saturday morning. I was in my own garage, contentedly sharpening the blades of my lawnmower when my phone rang. It was Chloe. Her voice was thin, strained, a wire pulled too tight. "Dad, can you come over?" My heart immediately clenched. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" "No, just come over. Please." I was in my truck in less than a minute, a cold dread settling in my gut. I pulled up to the blue house, and the first thing I noticed was the unfamiliar cars. An old, rust-splotched sedan was parked haphazardly behind Chloe's Prius, and a beat-up pickup truck was on the grass of the front lawn, leaving tire tracks in the sod I'd helped lay. The front door was open. I walked in, and the scene that greeted me stopped me dead in my tracks. The living room was full of people and boxes. Cardboard boxes, plastic bins, and suitcases were stacked haphazardly against the walls. On the sofa sat Brenda, Mark's mother, dabbing her eyes with a tissue while simultaneously directing the chaos like a grief-stricken general. Ray was there, hauling in a large television. Donnie, the oldest brother, was carrying a mismatched set of dining chairs through from the kitchen. And Mark, he stood in the center of it all, his face a mask of harried resignation. He saw me and flinched, then quickly composed his features into a look of pained necessity. Chloe was hovering by the staircase, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face pale and utterly defeated. She looked at me, and her eyes were begging for an intervention I didn't yet understand. "John," Mark said, stepping forward, his voice overly bright. "There's been a situation." Brenda let out a theatrical sob. "We lost it, John. We lost the apartment. The landlord sold the building. The new owner is moving in. We had 30 days, but we had nowhere to go. Nowhere." She dissolved into fresh tears. My eyes scanned the room. The boxes weren't just a few necessities. They were a lifetime's worth of accumulation. Lamps, photo albums, garish porcelain figurines, stacks of old magazines. They weren't visiting. They were moving in. "Mark," I said, my voice dangerously low. "What is this?" He ran a hand through his hair, avoiding my gaze. "It's just for a little while, John. Just until they can find a new place." They had nowhere else to go. What was I supposed to do? What were you supposed to do? The question screamed in my mind. You were supposed to protect your wife. You were supposed to guard the home I gave you. I looked at Chloe. She gave a tiny, helpless shrug, her eyes shining with unshed tears. The message was clear. The decision had been made. The invasion had been sanctioned. I walked through the first floor, a silent tour of the occupation. Brenda's things were in the formal dining room, a room Chloe had dreamed of using for holiday dinners. Ray and Donnie had claimed the basement, their weightlifting equipment already set up next to the boxes of Christmas decorations. The kitchen counters were cluttered with medications and knickknacks that weren't Chloe's. The house, her sanctuary, had been transformed into a crowded, chaotic boarding house in the space of a single morning. I found Mark alone in the kitchen, grabbing a beer from the fridge. "Mark," a word. He followed me out onto the back porch, the screen door slamming shut behind us. "This is unacceptable," I said, my voice trembling with a rage I was struggling to contain. "John, I get it, I do. But they're family. They're in a bind. This is not their home," I said, each word sharp and distinct. "This is Chloe's home. The home I gave her. This was not the deal." "The deal?" He shot back, a flash of defiance in his eyes. "What deal? This is my house, too. I have a right to help my family when they're in trouble. It's not your house." The words were out before I could stop them, harsh and true. I saw them land on him like a physical blow. His face hardened. "What did you just say?" I took a breath, trying to reel it in. "This house was for Chloe, for your life together, not for your mother and your brothers. This is a temporary situation, a very temporary one. Do you understand me?" He looked at me for a long moment, his jaw working. The charming salesman was gone, replaced by a cornered, resentful man. "Yeah," he said finally, his tone cold. "I understand you perfectly." He turned and walked back inside, leaving me alone on the porch. I looked out at the backyard at the raised garden bed Mark had built, now slightly overgrown. The welcome mat had been trampled, not by guests, but by invaders. And the man I had entrusted to guard the gate had just thrown it wide open. The house fell silent. Not a peaceful quiet, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a Cold War. My visits, once a weekly joy, became tense, diplomatic missions into occupied territory. I would pull into the driveway, my hands tight on the steering wheel, steeling myself for what I would find. The invaders had dug in. Brenda had not only taken over the dining room, but had commandeered the kitchen, her collection of gaudy thrift store ceramics now lining the counters that had once held only Chloe's simple, elegant pottery. The air no longer carried the gentle scent of lavender, but a cloying mix of cheap air freshener and the lingering odor of Ray's cigarettes, which he smoked just outside the back door despite the rules. Donnie's pickup truck was a permanent fixture on the lawn, a blatant stain on the curb appeal I had so admired. Chloe had become a ghost in her own home. When I visited, she was quiet, her movements subdued. She spoke in hushed tones, as if afraid to disturb the delicate ecosystem of entitlement that had taken root. Her vibrant spirit, the very thing this house was meant to nurture, was being systematically smothered. We couldn't have a real conversation. Brenda's ears were always perked, pretending to read a magazine in the living room, or Ray would lumber through on his way to the basement, his presence a constant interruption. One afternoon, I found Chloe in the backyard, staring blankly at the overgrown garden. "Hey, sweetheart," I said softly. She turned, and I saw the dark circles under her eyes. She tried to smile, but it was a weak, watery thing. "Hey, Dad, how are you holding up?" She just shook her head. Her eyes filling with tears, she quickly blinked away. "It's fine. It's just for a little while. He's looking for places for them." Her words lacked all conviction. It was a script she'd been given, a line to placate me. I looked through the kitchen window and saw Brenda watching us, her arms crossed, a disapproving frown on her face. She didn't like me being there. I was the one person who remembered what this house was supposed to be, and my presence was a silent accusation. The dynamic with Mark had shifted irrevocably. The easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by a stiff, formal politeness. He knew I disapproved, and my disapproval had become a wall between us. He spent more and more time at work, or so he claimed, leaving Chloe to navigate the minefield of his family alone. He was avoiding the conflict, and in doing so, he was choosing their comfort over hers. I tried to talk to him once. I cornered him in the garage as he was fetching a tool for Ray. "Mark, this has to end. Look at her. She's miserable. You wouldn't meet my eyes, fiddling with a wrench." "I'm working on it, John. It's not easy to find a rental big enough for all three of them that they can afford." "They don't need a place for all three of them," I insisted, my voice rising. "Ray and Donnie are grown men. They can find their own apartments. Your mother can get a small studio. This isn't a refugee camp. It's my daughter's home. They're my family," he snapped, finally looking at me, his eyes flashing with a defensive anger. "You've never understood that, have you? Your perfect little world with just you and Chloe. Well, some of us have more complicated lives. We stick together. Sticking together is one thing. Letting them cannibalize your marriage is another." He shook his head, a bitter smirk on his face. "You just don't want them in your house." He said the words with a pointed emphasis. Your house. The unspoken truth was now a weapon in his hands. "It's not about who owns the D, Mark," I said, my voice low and deadly serious. "It's about who owns the peace within these walls. And right now, it's not my daughter." I walked away, the chasm between us now uncrossable. The house was silent, but it was a silence filled with resentment, with unspoken grievances, with the slow, quiet death of a dream. The blue door was no longer a symbol of a promise kept, but a lid on a pressure cooker. I would drive away after these visits. The image of Chloe's defeated posture burned into my mind, a constant, gnawing pain in my chest. The silent house was screaming, and I was the only one who seemed to hear it. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening, a day so ordinary it felt like an insult. I was at home, trying to lose myself in the mindless rhythm of sanding an old wooden bookshelf, when my phone lit up with a photo from Chloe. It was a picture of the maple tree in her front yard, its leaves a breathtaking tapestry of crimson and gold against the clear autumn sky. Beneath it, she had written, "Remembered what you said about this tree. You were right. It's perfect. A simple message. A moment of beauty snatched from the gloom. It should have made me smile. Instead, it filled me with a profound, aching sadness. She was in that house, surrounded by chaos, and she was sending me a picture of the one thing that was still as I had promised it would be. It was a cry for help, quieter than a whisper. I decided to go over. I didn't call ahead. I brought 2 coffees from the place she liked, a peace offering for a war she wasn't even fighting. As I pulled up, I saw the pickup truck was still on the lawn, the grass beneath it now dead and muddy. The blue front door was marred by a scuff mark at the bottom. I walked up the path, the 2 coffee cups warm in my hands, and I heard the shouting before I even reached the porch. It was Brenda's voice, shrill and piercing. "After all we've done for you, this is how you repay family." I didn't knock. I pushed the door open. The scene in the living room was a frozen tableau of domestic warfare. Brenda stood, red-faced, pointing a trembling finger at Chloe, who was backed against the staircase, her arms wrapped around herself as if for physical protection. Ray and Donnie loomed behind their mother, a pair of hulking, sullen bookends. Mark was standing between them all, his hands up in a gesture of helpless placation. "What is going on here?" My voice cut through the tension like a knife. All eyes turned to me. Brenda's narrowed with fresh venom. Chloe's filled with a mortified relief. Mark's widened in panic. "This is none of your business, John," Brenda spat. "This is a family matter." "My daughter is my family," I said, my tone flat and cold. I walked over to Chloe and handed her one of the coffees. Her hands were shaking. "What happened?" Chloe's voice was a fragile thread. I just asked if they had any leads on apartments. That maybe we could all sit down and help them look this weekend." Brenda let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "She can't wait to throw us out onto the street, in my son's own house." I looked at Mark. "Is this your house, Mark?" He flinched. "John, not now. I asked you a simple question. Is this your house?" The room went utterly silent. The line I had come to draw was now visible in the air between us. "You know I'm not on the deed," he muttered, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. "You made sure of that." Brenda's jaw dropped. She looked from Mark to me, her confusion turning to a dawning, triumphant fury. "You're not on the deed? This isn't your house. It's our home," Mark insisted, his voice weak. "But it's not your asset, is it?" Brenda pressed, her eyes gleaming with a new, terrible understanding. She turned her glare on Chloe. You let him put his name on nothing? After all he's done for you?" This was it, the heart of the rot. It was never about a safe haven. It was about an asset, a foothold. I took a step forward into the center of the room. I looked not at Brenda, not at her sons, but at Mark. I spoke to him, and him alone. "I bought this house for Chloe, to be a sanctuary for her and the man she loved. I gave you the key. I trusted you with her safety, with her peace." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink into the stifling air. "You have broken that trust. You have allowed this circus to invade her space, to steal her peace, and to disrespect the one thing I have ever asked of you." I turned my gaze to Brenda, then to Ray and Donnie, my eyes sweeping over each of them. "This ends now," I said, my voice low but ringing with absolute finality. "You have 1 week. 1 week to pack your things and get out of my daughter's house." The silence that followed was explosive. Brenda looked as if she'd been slapped. Ray took a menacing step forward. "You can't do that." "I can, and I am," I said, not breaking a stare. "This is my property. You're trespassers. If you're not gone in 7 days, I will have the sheriff here to remove you. I will press charges. I will make sure this follows you. Do you understand me?" I finally looked back at Mark. His face was a pale mask of shame and fury. The line was drawn. He was on one side with them, and I was on the other with my daughter. The silent war was over. The real one had just begun. The week that followed my ultimatum was a tense, frigid stalemate. The house, once a silent pressure cooker, was now a fortress under siege, with the inhabitants glaring at each other from behind invisible battlements. I didn't visit. I didn't call. I knew my presence would only escalate the conflict, and I had said all there was to say. The ball was in their court. My threat was real, and they knew it. I spent the days preparing for the possibility of an ugly eviction, my stomach a tight, not a dread. Chloe called me once, her voice a hushed, frantic whisper. "They're not leaving, Dad. They're just staying." Mark isn't talking to me. His mother cries every time I walk into a room. Ray and Donnie just stare at me. It's a nightmare. "Hold fast, baby," I told her, my heart breaking for her. 1 week. They'll break before we do. I wasn't so sure. Brenda was a master manipulator, and Mark seemed utterly under her thrall. The seventh day dawned, a cold, gray Sunday. I dressed with the solemnity of a man going to a funeral, which in a way I was. It was the funeral of whatever remained of my relationship with my son-in-law. I arrived at the house at exactly noon. The pickup truck was still on the lawn. My heart sank. So it would come to this. I would have to call the sheriff. I would have to stand there and watch as officers escorted a weeping Brenda from the premises, as my daughter's marriage was publicly and officially torn apart on the front lawn. I walked to the front door, my footsteps heavy on the path. I could hear the shouting even before I entered. It was worse than before. I opened the door. The scene was one of pure chaos. Boxes were half-packed, their contents spilling out. Brenda was wailing on the sofa, while Ray and Donnie stood over Mark, who was pale and sweating. "Can't believe you're letting him do this to your own mother." Ray was shouting, jabbing a finger into Mark's chest. "He's not on the deed, you idiot." Donnie snarled. "He has no say. We have rights. And what rights are those?" I said, my voice cutting through the din. They all turned. Brenda's wails turned into hysterical sobs. Mark looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw a man torn in two, completely broken. "This is your fault," Ray shouted, taking a step toward me. "You're tearing this family apart." "No," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You did that when you moved your entire lives into a home that wasn't yours. You have until the end of the day to be gone. I'm not asking again." It was then that Brenda stood up, her face a grotesque mask of tear-streaked makeup and righteous fury. She pointed a trembling finger, not at me, but at Chloe, who had just come down the stairs, her face a mask of terror. "You!" Brenda shrieked, her voice shrill enough to shatter glass. "You did this. You and your father. You think you're so much better than us. This was supposed to be our fresh start. Mark was supposed to take care of us. He owes us. And you greedy, selfish little girl, you've poisoned him against us. I should have known a woman without a mother would have no concept of family loyalty." The air left the room. The words hung there, violent, toxic. Chloe physically recoiled as if she'd been struck, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a pain so profound it was almost beautiful in its purity. Mark stared at his mother, his mouth agape, the last vestiges of his denial stripped away by her cruelty. I saw red. A pure, unadulterated rage filled me, a white-hot fire that burned away all hesitation, all diplomacy. I took a step forward, my fist clenched. I was about to unleash a torrent of fury that would have seared the paint from the walls. But I never got the chance. Mark spoke. His voice was quiet, but it cut through his mother's sobs and his brother's grumbling like a scalpel. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at Chloe. He was staring at his mother, and his face was a landscape of utter devastation and final, crystalline clarity. He said a single sentence. "Get out, Mom." The silence was absolute. Brenda's sobs choked off. Ray and Donnie froze. Chloe stared, uncomprehending. Brenda blinked. What did you say?" Mark turned his head, his eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second, and in them, I saw a surrender, an apology, and a flicker of the man I had hoped he could be. Then he looked back at his family, his voice gaining a strength I hadn't known he possessed. I said, "Get out." He looked at his brothers. "All of you, you're leaving. Today. Now." It was the single sentence, the one that changed everything. It wasn't my threats, my money, or my anger that broke the siege. It was his mother's vicious, unforgivable attack on the woman he loved. She had gone for the jugular, and in doing so, she had finally, irrevocably severed the umbilical cord. The spell was broken. The line had been crossed, and Mark had finally chosen a side. He had chosen my daughter. The silence that followed Mark's words was more shocking than any of the shouting that had preceded it. It was the silence of a universe being reordered. Brenda stared at her son, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water, no sound emerging. The theatrical tears dried up, replaced by a genuine, gut-level shock. Her greatest weapon, her perceived victimhood, had just been rendered useless. Her own general had disbanded the army. Ray was the first to break. "You've got to be kidding me, Mark." After everything. Mark didn't look at him. His eyes were locked on his mother. His expression a mixture of exhaustion and iron resolve. No, he said, his voice low but unwavering. Not after everything. Because of everything. Because of that. He gestured toward Chloe, who was still trembling on the stairs. You pack your things. You take what you brought. And you leave. What followed was a grim, sullen exodus. The energy of defiant occupation evaporated, leaving only the bleak reality of defeat. There were no more arguments, no more pleas. The fight had gone out of them the moment their primary defender switched sides. Brenda moved like a sleepwalker, mechanically placing her porcelain figurines into a cardboard box, her face a stiff mask of betrayal. Ray and Donnie muttered curses under their breath, throwing resentful glances at Mark, but they started carrying boxes and bags out to the rusty sedan and the beat-up truck. I stood by the front door, a silent sentinel, ensuring the retreat continued. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. My presence was a constant reminder of the legal and moral cliff they had been pushed from. Mark helped them. It was the most painful part to watch. He moved like an automaton, his face blank, carrying his mother's heavy television out to the pickup, loading his brother's weightlifting equipment. It was a final, somber duty, the last act of a son and brother before drawing a permanent line. He wasn't doing it out of love, but out of a desperate need to see it through, to get them gone so he could face the ruins of his own life. Chloe didn't move from the stairs. She watched the procession of boxes and bitterness with wide, haunted eyes. She was the prize that had been fought over, the territory that had been contested, and she looked utterly ravaged by the war. It took over 2 hours. The house slowly shed the weight of the invasion. The cluttered counters reappeared. The dining room, once a makeshift bedroom, stood empty. The basement was cleared of everything but the faint smell of sweat and cigarette smoke. Finally, the last box was shoved into the overstuffed trunk of the sedan. Brenda stood by her car door. She didn't look at Chloe or me. She fixed her gaze on Mark, who stood on the porch, his arms crossed, his posture rigid. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice stripped of its hysterics, cold and sharp as a shard of glass. "When you're alone and you realize who your real family is, you'll remember this day." Mark didn't respond. He just stared back, his face unreadable. She got in the car. Ray started the engine with a loud, protesting grind. Donnie gunned the truck's motor, peeling away from the curb and leaving fresh, deep scars in the lawn. I watched them go, the two vehicles turning the corner and disappearing from view. The street was quiet again. I looked at the driveway. It was empty. For the first time in months, it was just Chloe's Prius sitting there. The sight was so simple, so normal, and yet it felt like a miracle. The siege was over. The invaders were gone. The blue front door was closed. Mark and Chloe were inside, alone together for the first time in what felt like an eternity. I didn't go in. I knew my part was done. The battle was won, but the war for their marriage was just beginning, and it was a war I could not fight for them. I stood there for a long time on the sidewalk, looking at the house. The autumn sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows. The crimson leaves of the maple tree rustled in the breeze. It was the picture I had held in my mind for 15 years. A safe home for my daughter. The promise, against all odds, had been reclaimed. But as I turned and walked back to my truck, the victory felt hollow and fragile. The house was empty of the wrong people, but it was also empty of trust, of peace, of the easy joy that had once lived there. The driveway was empty, and so, I feared, were their hearts. Weeks bled into a month. The silence from the blue house was deafening. I respected it. I gave them space, the way one backs away from a wounded animal, knowing that the kindest thing is to let it heal without interference. My phone didn't ring with Chloe's excited updates. The driveway remained empty of unfamiliar cars. The lawn mercifully began to recover, the tire tracks slowly filling in with new, green growth. When she finally called, her voice was different. Not the bright, bubbly tone from before the invasion, nor the hushed, terrified whisper from during it. It was quieter, older, wiser. "Hey, Dad, can you come over?" There's something I need to do, and I'd like you to be there. I didn't ask questions. I'll be right there. When I pulled up, the house looked the same, yet fundamentally altered. It had a stillness to it, a sense of calm that felt earned rather than accidental. Chloe was waiting for me on the porch, a small, flat box on the swing beside her. She stood up and hugged me, a long, solid embrace that spoke of grief and gratitude in equal measure. "Where's Mark?" I asked gently. "He's inside," she said, "packing." The words hung in the cool air. I simply nodded. I had suspected this was the destination of their painful journey. She picked up the box. "I need to change the locks." We went inside. The house was clean, almost sterile. Every trace of Brenda and her sons was gone, but so were many of the personal touches that had made a home. The photos were down from the mantel. The garish painting from Mark's brother was gone. It was a house in neutral, waiting for a new identity. Mark was in the bedroom, placing folded shirts into a suitcase. He looked up as we entered, his expression unreadable. There was no anger left, only a profound exhaustion. "John," he said with a slight nod. "Mark." We looked at each other for a long moment, two generals after a war that had no true victor. The house stood between us, the prize that had cost us all so much. I'll get the rest from the garage later," he said to Chloe. "Okay," she replied, her voice steady. There was nothing else to say. The apologies were inadequate. The recriminations were pointless. Their marriage had been a casualty of the occupation, its foundation cracked beyond repair by his betrayal and her loss of trust. Him moving out was not an act of anger, but the final, sad admission of that fact. He zipped his suitcase, gave one last, lost look around the room that had been his, and walked out. We heard the front door close, and a moment later, his car start and drive away. Chloe let out a long, slow breath, as if she had been holding it for months. She looked at me, her eyes clear. "Okay, let's do this." We opened the box. Inside was a new, bright brass deadbolt and a set of shiny, uncut keys. We worked in silence, me with my tools, her handing me screws. We unscrewed the old lock, a piece of hardware that had witnessed so much. The initial joy, the slow creep of intrusion, the slammed doors, and the shouted accusations. I pulled out of the door, and it felt like removing a diseased organ. I fitted the new deadbolt into place. It was solid, heavy, well-made. I tightened the screws, each turn feeling like a ritual, a sealing of the past. I slid the new key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying thunk. A clean sound, a definitive sound. I handed the key to Chloe. She held it in her palm, feeling its weight. She looked from the key to the blue door, to the empty, quiet living room, and then back to me. "It's mine again," she whispered, and this time, the tears that welled in her eyes were not of pain, but of reclamation. "It's yours," I confirmed. "No one gets a key unless you give it to them." She walked through the first floor, locking the new deadbolt, then unlocking it, testing its authority. It was more than just a new piece of hardware. It was a symbol. It was a statement that this was her space, her sanctuary, her kingdom. The locks she had allowed to be picked, first by Mark's family and then by Mark's weakness, were now reforged in brass and resolve. We sat on the porch swing as the sun set, the same swing I had pictured her on years ago. The silence was no longer heavy or screaming. It was peaceful. It was just the two of us, the creak of the swing, and the rustle of the red leaves in the maple tree. "It's not the happy ending I pictured," she said softly, resting her head on my shoulder. "Endings are rarely happy," I replied, putting my arm around her. "But they make space for new beginnings. This is your beginning, Chloe, however you want it to look." She held up the new key, watching it catch the last of the evening light. It was no longer just a key to a house. It was a key to her own future. The promise I had made so long ago had been tested, broken, and ultimately fulfilled in a way I never could have imagined. It wasn't a promise of a perfect life, free from pain. It was a promise of a safe harbor, a place where she could heal and grow and decide on her own terms who she would allow inside. The new lock was on the door, and a new strength was locked within her heart.